Christine Cornels, and we have a great show for you today with Top of the Morning. We are meeting women who are about to be inducted into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame. And these are women who are chosen every year. They're women who have been chosen for lasting contributions to the economic, political, cultural, and societal life of the state, and to provide role models to achievement for our future women leaders. So we have some very distinguished women, and looking forward to introducing them to you. And thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. We're so happy to have you here, and I'd like to introduce you to Margaret Dunkle, one of the inductees to Maryland's Women's Hall of Fame, and we're so glad to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, Margaret, I understand you were involved with Title IX. You've been called the unsung hero of Title IX. Can you share a little bit about what Title IX is and what your role was?
Title IX is the federal law that was passed in 1972 that prohibits discrimination in education in schools and colleges that receive any federal education money. So it's analogous to what Title VI does for racial discrimination, and it's in the education arena. So it covers all activities of any school or any college that receives federal funding. Wow. Which means just about every school and every college in the country.
Oh, sure. Well,
yeah.
How did you get involved in the issue? What was your role?
In 1972, just a few days after Title IX became law, I started working with the Association of American Colleges Project on Women. And at that point, Richard Nixon had just signed the known liberal, Richard Nixon, had just signed the bill, and it became law. It was Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. And it was passed because people were concerned about the issue of women not getting into graduate and professional schools. There were quotas on women. There were limitations on, you could keep women out, and it was perfectly legal. Medical schools, law schools, business schools. The reason we have so many doctors and lawyers and even legislators today who are women is because after Title IX, it was illegal to exclude women from those schools if they were qualified. So we started looking at that, and the law was passed around the link between education and employment. And it became very clear that athletics was becoming a metaphor for strong, able women on the playing field.
It's a very visible part
and in
of the
life.
school.
It was very visible.
Yeah. So
you could see it. And also when I started to do the research to look at what was going on, the differences for men and women, for boys and girls, were so striking that when you laid them out, it was a classic case for discrimination.
Wow. And so by being able to raise those issues, you were able to raise the awareness, really, of schools and the public, I suppose.
Well, we raised more than awareness, because the government had to write a regulation to implement Title IX.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the initial work I did in the early 1970s became a report that laid out all of the different ways that sports programs in colleges, because I was working for an education association, might discriminate. No athletic scholarships for women were allowed in 1972. The number of women on teams and the number of female teams were minimal. Women had bake sales to fund travel. They got the leftover equipment.
Wow. Considerably different than what the teams were.
They got 1 to 2% of all the money spent. Yeah. Some schools, like the University of Michigan, spent more than $1 million for the boys' teams, and nothing on the girls' teams.
Now, do you feel like things have changed to today, or have there been a success as a result of that, or how would you characterize today?
There's been enormous progress. There's been enormous progress. It's no longer exceptional to see a female lawyer or a female doctor, or to look in a graduate school class and to see men and women fairly equally represented. In 1972, you didn't see that. schools overtly said, we have a quota on women, you have to have higher scores to get in, you're married, we won't admit you because you won't stay, or you're not married, you don't need the training, and you'll get married, so we're not going to admit you.
A lot of young women today don't realize that that happened. That was just a few decades ago.
It was 40 years ago. Title IX is starting to get a few wrinkles. It turns 40 this June.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Yeah. I did want to ask you, too, because I understand you were among the first to notice and document difficulties facing pregnant college students as well. If you could share a little bit about kind of how you identified that issue and what you ended up doing about it.
Well, I ended up looking at ways that Title IX issues as they affected colleges. And one of the issues that came to the forefront was pregnancy discrimination in student health insurance programs. The Title IX regulations, which is what the kind of the guidance about what you do.
Okay. Yeah.
The Title IX regulations said that pregnancy had to be treated like other temporary physical disabilities. That was the standard. And yet women were kicked out of college or high school when they got pregnant. They were not given any health coverage. Their student health insurance excluded pregnancy, had a higher deductible for pregnancy, wouldn't.
So it really limited the options for women and their ability to continue
It limited the option.
I also read that you founded, and let me get the name of it, the Early Identification and Intervention Collaborative for Los Angeles County. It involves like more than 350 partner organizations.
Exactly.
I understand. It sounds like when you see an issue that's not being addressed, an injustice, you look for ways to solve them. I was curious of your approach when you see an injustice. What do you recommend people consider when they see an injustice or a problem to tackle? What would you recommend that they do to help address it?
I think they need to take a look at what they think is really unfair. They need to see how they could make a difference. And then they need to craft some strategies that are timely. Sometimes I use the three criteria: impact, opportunity, and partners.
Okay, impact, opportunity, and partners. Okay.
What's going to make a big difference? And if it's not going to make a big difference, don't bother.
Okay.
Opportunity could be a bill's coming up. The governor's giving a speech. There's some scandal on the front page of the Baltimore Sun or the Washington Post or whatever. And partners is who's for you and who's against you. And if you can look at those things and then understand enough about how government and governmental systems work so you can start to figure out, maybe you can make a little tweak here and there. For example, in the area of early screening and intervention, we took a close look at the Head Start bill. And Head Start's been around since 1964. And it turns out that Head Start said, you have to do something developmental with kids, but there was no quality standard. So we worked with Republican and Democratic people on Capitol Hill, staffers, and the result was in the 2007 reauthorization of Head Start, they included a provision that said every Head Start program had to do developmental screening with a good tool. So now Head Start programs.
So you found a way to plug it in.
You've got to find a way. You've got to find an opportunity. Okay. Making broad general statements may be helpful,
right,
but it doesn't propel change the way it does when you can find an opportunity where you can really do something specific.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us and sharing. If anybody wants to contact you or learn more about what you're doing now, is there some contact information you can share?
I can give you my email. It's margaretdunkle@aol.com.
Oh, easy enough. And Dunkle, D-U-N-K-L-E.
Exactly.
Yes, great.
Exactly.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.
In regards to Margaret Dunkle. I am delighted today. This year is a special year because it's the 40th anniversary of Title IX, the most important legislation ever passed for women and girls in the United States since women first obtained the right to vote. It prohibits sex discrimination at all levels of education, and though it prohibits much more than discrimination in sports, it is often known as the sports law. If you look at some of the histories of Title IX, you're not going to find Margaret's name there, and yet it was Margaret who played the major role in the implementation of Title IX in the area of sports. She is truly the unsung hero of Title IX. When it was passed, hardly anybody knew that it was that Title IX was going to cover athletics. Hardly anybody realized there was discrimination in athletics and sports. Margaret was my deputy director at the Project on the Status and Education of Women at the Association of American Colleges. And what Margaret did was to document the huge, really huge disparities in sports, in resources, in training, in coaching, equipment, scheduling, facilities, and the like. She put this first report together at a time when there's no email, no web, no Google, no reports, no books on the subject, virtually nothing anywhere about the status of women and girls in sports, and I still don't know how she did it. Margaret identified about 50 common policies and practices that were previously unnoticed, or if anybody knew about them, they certainly weren't seen as discrimination. For example, many universities have no budget whatsoever for women's varsity athletics, while some men's varsity athletics had budgets of over $1 million. It was common for most women's teams to raise money, selling apples at football games or Christmas trees or whatever, to pay for their uniforms, their equipment, their travel expenses, while men traveled often in chartered planes and buses. Virtually all universities and colleges had no athletic scholarships for women. Margaret's report would stun the world of athletics, the world of higher education, the women athletes, the members of the Congress, and those in the government who would later enforce Title IX, and women and men throughout the country who were advocating for women's rights. And the general public, everybody was upset because all could see now and understand the tremendous amount of sex discrimination that women athletes were facing in virtually every college and university. Now, if that was all that Margaret had done, that would have been enough. That's a pretty big achievement. But she didn't stop there. No one anywhere in the United States, and perhaps in the world, had ever written about equality and equity, how that would look in collegiate sports. And so what Margaret did was to develop all the principles that would be used later to develop and evaluate athletic programs to ensure that women athletes were treated equitably. If men and women were to have equity in sports, what would it look like? How would you evaluate existing programs? Nobody had ever even asked the question until Margaret looked at that. How would you decide what was needed to bring about equity? These very principles developed by Margaret Dunkle were ultimately adopted by the United States government, the Office for the Civil Rights at the Department of Education. They are still used today. They form the basis of the athletic guidelines that all colleges and universities must follow to be in compliance with Title IX. These principles, Margaret's principles, became the rules that opened the door for enormous expansion of women and girls in athletics. And that was not all. For as soon as the male sports establishment discovered that Title IX was going to cover and make some changes in men's sports and give more rights and activities for women's sports, they tried to lobby the Congress to weaken Title IX's coverage of sports. And Margaret was the one, as chair, she was first chair of the National Coalition for Women and Girls in Education. She led the charge and she beat it down. Despite all these changes in sports, and they are huge, we still have a long way to go. But yet without Margaret's work, we wouldn't have gotten very far at all. She charted the road, and we are still following it. So thank you, Margaret, because you have truly made a difference for innumerable women and girls. Your work will never be forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks to you for shining a light on Title IX, athletics, and women's educational equity. This short little law has fundamentally changed us as a country and moved us to a better place where girls as well as boys can get the education they need to pursue their dreams and fulfill their potential. Oh, how things have changed. When I was at Calvert Senior High School, there were no varsity teams for the girls, just the boys. Home ec for girls, shop for boys. When no liberal, Richard Milhouse Nixon, signed the Title IX law, signed Title IX into law in 1972, no one guessed that sports would very quickly become the engine of progress. Everyone thought the effect of Title IX would be to give women a fair shot at graduate and professional schools, the gateway to the best jobs. And of course, it did do just that. Before Title IX is the reason why today having a female doctor or lawyer or legislator is so ordinary, not a rare event or some wild exception. Before Title IX, sex discrimination in schools and colleges was the norm, overt, pervasive, perfectly legal. But it was sports that propelled Title IX to the front pages and into the hearts and minds of dads as well as moms seeking the best future for their daughter. Within days of its passage, I began working at the Association of American Colleges Project on Women with Money. We soon realized that the issue of strong, gifted women in sports would become a metaphor for a society with strong, gifted women in every aspect of the workplace and in life. As I dug into the issues, a stark picture of discrimination popped into focus. No athletic scholarships for women, far fewer teams, far fewer opportunities, females getting casts off from the men's teams, female coaches working for free, bake sales, and women's teams receiving, on average, just 1% to 2% of the college sports budgets, sometimes no budget at all. It is so different today. Is there anyone in this room who does not know a girl or a young woman who has played school or college sports and is the better for it? All of us know someone like that. You know, I was never quite convinced that Wonder Bread builds strong bodies in 8 ways. But athletics, that's another matter. Physically, sports promote oxygen flow that revs up the brain. Exercise builds strength, endurance, coordination. Just as importantly, psychologically, sports teach about excellence, about healthy competition, about teamwork, about leadership, about understanding the rules of the game, and winning and losing with grace. And it builds confidence that is honestly earned. It is a special honor for me to be on the same list as Elizabeth Brown. Elizabeth Brown was the first Brown versus Board of Education of Colbert County, not Topeka. In 1937, this young teacher, aided by an equally young and dedicated NAACP attorney, Thurgood Marshall, brought and won a 14th Amendment equal protection case against the County Board of Education for paying African American teachers about half what white teachers were paid. She is a true pioneer of racial equality in the workplace, and I can only hope that my work for gender equality in the classroom and the playing fields echoes her noble spirit. We've made enormous progress. During the Vietnam War, Harvard President Nathan Pusey was asked what the draft meant for Harvard graduate programs. His reply, "We shall be left with the blind, the lame, and the women." Poetic justice, today the president of Harvard is a woman. But there is still a long way to go. Today there are still fewer girls playing high school sports than there were boys 40 years ago when Title IX became law. And even today, most schools and colleges would flunk Title IX, surely in athletics and likely in other areas as well. The important thing is that the journey to equality continues. And today, most Americans No, surely no. That a fair playing field for boys and girls in sports and in life is a pathway to a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Bernice was also inducted in the Women's Hall of Fame in 2010.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show today. It's been so wonderful to be able to meet these distinguished women. I'm glad to be able to learn something from them myself, and I hope you did as well. Keep tuning in, and we will see you next time.